What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on X at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Like, subscribe, comment, hit those 5-star reviews if you're listening on the audio channel. And of course, make sure to check out those Pack-A-Day Podcast memberships. We have a ton of new members today. Ryan DeCoof, Whiskey the Gathering, John Anderson, Ian, Autumn Gee, Dave Schubert, Andrew's Paradise, Skittish, Jewel Lee, James Lenzowski, James Keel, and Mike Smith. Thank you so much for checking out the Pack-A-Day Podcast memberships. Appreciate you guys a ton. Hope you are enjoying all the content. For those of you who haven't checked it out yet, go do it. We have an interesting show today. This is what makes the NFL so amazing. And the NFL offseason, madness and chaos and just one expected turn after the other. The conventional thinking, the reporting, the analysis, the all of it, the common sense would have told just about everyone that Aaron Jones would be back with the Packers in 2024 and that A.J. Dillon would not be back with the Packers in 2024 and would explore other options and would likely end up with another team. There was no counter argument really to be made. Now, there were some certainly that wanted A.J. Dillon back, and I understand that. And there were, obviously that is what has happened. I don't think there was anyone, I'm sure there's somebody, because there's always somebody. I don't think there's anyone that really wanted Aaron Jones gone. Yet here we are. Aaron Jones is a member of the Minnesota Vikings out of nowhere, and A.J. Dillon is still a member of the Green Bay Packers. We will go over that in great detail. This is going to be, by the way, one of my all-time nerdy conversations about A.J. Dillon contract stuff that I'm really, really excited about. So we'll get there eventually. So I'm going to get everything else out of the way first, and then we'll save A.J. Dillon towards the end. But a very fun conversation on the contract, how it works, and what it means for Green Bay, because there are some very polar opposite sides on the Dillon conversation. Some clearly extremely happy that he is back in Green Bay, and Green Bay can now go into the draft without needing to necessarily have to address the running back position. And then there's another group of people that are like, this is terrible. They needed to go in an entirely different direction. A.J. Dillon does not bring enough to the table, and they're frustrated that he's back. As usual, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, and we'll get there and we'll go over all of it and go over why this is a very interesting situation for Green Bay. All right. Before we get there, like I said, lots of news and notes from Thursday, the first of which, Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs both became official. The Green Bay Packers announced it. They will both be having probably, or maybe have already had, if you're listening to this a little bit later in the day, but official locker room availabilities on Friday morning, early in the morning. So they will get to meet with the media in the locker room. That should be interesting. We'll see, what Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney have to say. That should be really, really fun to kind of get their feedback on the entire process and their excitement of being a Green Bay Packer and all those sorts of things. But there always is that slight moment of, is this really going to happen? Because as you know, just because it's reported Monday or Tuesday, it doesn't mean it's official until Wednesday. There's a variety of things that can go wrong. Sometimes a player has a change of heart. We've seen a couple of those already this offseason where a player was reportedly going to sign with one team, had a change of heart, and then signed with another team. Will Lutz was an example of that. I forget if it was Jacksonville or another team that he signed with, but was reportedly signed with another team and then had a change of hearts and I think decided to stay with Denver, if I remember correctly. There was one other one as well, Eric Kendricks, who reportedly signed with the 49ers and then had a change of heart and decided to go and play with the Dallas Cowboys. So these things happen, and you never quite know if it's going to. The other thing is a physical. You have to get them in the building and test them and pass the physical, and sometimes they go in for the physical and it doesn't match up with what you were expecting. And what happens in those situations is, especially a player like Xavier McKinney, where you're giving this huge contract to over 4 years, if something's wrong on the physical, you need to really reevaluate if you want to give that huge contract. So these things are never quite official until they're actually official. And thankfully, Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs are actually official. Meanwhile, Christian Welch, off-ball linebacker, became official as well. Special teams specialist, and I don't know if I want to say ace, but core special teamer. That one became official as well. A little less excitement there than Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, but all three of those moves did become official on Thursday. Meanwhile, Was reported as well, finally, that the exclusive rights free agents, Caleb Jones, Daniel Whalen, and Emmanuel Wilson, all were tendered officially those exclusive rights free agent deals. And those are now 3 players that are back on the active 90-man roster. No concern there whatsoever. That was always going to happen. Like I said, Caleb Jones would have been the only one where maybe they had to think about, but they've put 2 years into him. I can't imagine now is going to be the time they weren't going to offer him a minimum deal. Never seemed feasible. So Whalen, Emmanuel Wilson, Caleb Jones, all officially back and on the roster. And then next year, all 3 will be restricted free agents. And that's where it becomes a little bit more tricky, right? Because you have the situation where you have to tender them, and that usually comes with like a $3 million minimum contract on a 1-year deal. Are you going to want to give that to a punter? Are you going to want to give that to a number 3-ish running back in Emmanuel Wilson? Are you going to want to give that to a Caleb Jones if he hasn't proven himself yet? So those will become trickier conversations next year. But this year, all exclusive rights free agents, all were tendered and all will be back with the team in training camp. And I think Daniel Whalen, I don't even know if he's going to get competition, to be honest. He probably is just the punter, but we'll have to wait and see. Emmanuel Wilson will have the opportunity to earn a running back spot. Caleb Jones will have the opportunity to earn an offensive line spot, but Whalen probably the best bet of those 3 to make the team. Even if Jones and Wilson don't make it, both would have, I think, real opportunities to come back on the practice squad in 2024. But we can get to all of that once training camp hits and we start actually breaking down roster cuts and things like that. But we are a ways away from that. Meanwhile, the linebacker position continues to just get obliterated in free agency, and we are getting to the bottom of the barrel. Tyrell Dodson signed with the Seahawks, Devin White signed with the Philadelphia Eagles, and there are precious few options left at off-ball linebacker. Jerome Baker seems to be the real only option left on the market. He's going to have multiple suitors. You do have Anthony Campanelli, who coached the linebackers in Miami, where it just so happened that Jerome Baker played. I had somebody ask me online, well, that means like they'll probably have a better chance of getting him. Maybe. What it does tell me is that it gives Green Bay the best opportunity to get the best feedback and intel on Jerome Baker, but we don't know what Campanelli is telling Green Bay. Campanelli could be telling Brian Gutekunst to stay away from that guy. I coached him, and it's probably just best to go in a different direction. Or Campanelli could be saying, this guy's really, really good. Do whatever you can to get him in the building, and let's see if we can get him signed to the team. Doesn't necessarily mean that Goody would do it, but they should be getting very good intel from his former linebackers coach. But he is the last one that's really on the market that you could have any level of excitement over. Isaiah Simmons, we talked about with Perry and Alex. Perry actually brought him up. This is a player that was a first round pick, right? Top 10 pick, I think like number 9 overall with Arizona. Was a safety linebacker hybrid. Again, to me, he is just a linebacker at this stage of his career, has that sideline to sideline ability, raw athleticism. That's the type of linebacker that you're getting. The interesting thing that I would sort of compare it to here is that signing Isaiah Simmons to probably like a 1-year, $2 million deal, something like that, is very akin to the deal that they gave Devondre Campbell in a very similar sort of transaction. Campbell also at that time, I can't remember, did he come? He played for Atlanta, and then he went to Arizona for 1 year, if I remember correctly, and he came from Arizona. Isaiah Simmons played in Arizona and then went to, I think, the New York Giants, and now he'd be coming to Green Bay. But either way, similar sort of like career arc where they were, super athletic linebackers that were thought of highly. Now, Simmons was a top 10. I think Campbell was a 4th round pick-ish, somewhere in that range. But either way, these highly athletic linebackers never really lived up to expectations, had a little bit of a journeyman approach to their career up until that point. And then again, Campbell signed on a 1-year, $2 million deal, had that all-pro first season, and then sort of regressed back to what he was prior to that one unbelievable year. Simmons has struggled in a very similar way to what Campbell did before coming to Green Bay. Maybe Green Bay gives him a similar 1-year, $2 million deal that they gave to Devondre Campbell in 2021, and maybe he can put together a similar type of season. That's a lot to ask. Hey, we're going to find this guy on 1-year, $2 million deal, and let's have him become a first-team All-Pro again. Probably not going to happen, right? But, it's a similar sort of career arc. And like I said, there's just not much left outside of Jerome Baker and Isaiah Simmons. The only other one left that they could kind of consider would be Devondre Campbell. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I really, really don't think so. But it was like a $10 million deal that like they basically got off of. It doesn't mean that he can't come back. I said there was sort of like those weird vibes last year, it felt like, but maybe that was much ado about nothing in the locker room. I can't imagine those vibes got better when Green Bay released Devondre Campbell. I just don't see it. I don't think it's the best case scenario, but maybe not impossible. And we just said at the beginning of this episode, strange things happen. We were not expecting AJ Dillon back. He's back. We were not expecting Aaron Jones gone. He's gone. Like these things, sometimes you just cannot predict them, and you never say never in this industry. And when you get down to it, he's probably the second best linebacker on the market right now after Jerome Baker. And maybe he fits better with Jeff Hafley's defense. Trust me, I am not talking myself into it, and I don't think it's going to happen, but he is pretty legitimately the second best linebacker still on the market. I don't know. Either way, the point being here is that linebacker market continues to just get completely, like I said, obliterated and basically scooped up, and there's not really anyone left. And at this point, Jerome Baker, Devondre Campbell, Isaiah Simmons, that's it. And even that is, again, sort of outside of Baker, sort of getting to the bottom of the barrel at best. Meanwhile, I've had a lot of questions about Yosh Nijman and why he hasn't signed, why Green Bay has not brought him back. Is there something that's going on, or what the situation is? I will say this. I do think he probably gets a decent offensive line contract, probably sooner rather than later. He can play left tackle or right tackle. I have always been the one that sort of felt like I'm just yelling at nothing or just commenting into thin air, that I've never really been a big Yosh Nijman believer. It's not that he's bad, all right? It's not that he's this terrible, can't play sort of player. He's played some really high leverage snaps in the NFL, some very important snaps. He started games. He's played left tackle. He's played right tackle. But I've never been the believer that a lot of people were, and maybe some people still are, that he's a legitimate starting tackle in the NFL. Never, ever, ever viewed it that way. Even when he was starting, I never viewed him as a legitimate starting tackle. Is he a solid swing tackle off the bench? Yes. Is there value for that in the NFL? Absolutely. But there are weaknesses to his game. And even when he's a swing tackle, I don't really feel that he elevates to the level of you can put him in and just forget about it and everything is fine. I think there are issues when he is starting. And we're going off of just a season ago when, if you remember, the conversation was if Green Bay puts a second round tender on him, people were thinking that that somebody was going to sign him to a huge offensive tackle deal and Green Bay was going to get a second round pick in return. And I said, if he gets a huge deal and some team gives up a second round pick for him, I will do the hot chip challenge or whatever it is, where you've got to eat the insanely spicy chip. I will do it on a podcast, and that never came to fruition. It was never, ever, ever going to happen. The NFL just didn't view him, nor should they have viewed him, as a player that you want to give a huge contract to and give up a second round pick in the process. And we are seeing that play out this year, where not only do teams not have to give up a pick, they're seemingly not willing to give up a big contract. End of the day, I do believe he'll find a reasonable deal out on the market as a swing tackle. Could that still be back in Green Bay? Maybe. Maybe the market doesn't really, pan out the way that Nijman was expected. And maybe he gets a 1-year cheap deal in Green Bay, just like AJ Dillon did. Again, that's well within the realm of possibility. But overall, that to me is why Yosh is still on the market, is just because he's slightly below average swing tackle. And there's only going to be so many teams that are aggressively looking for that type of player. But maybe he's back. And if he's back, I'm totally cool with it. Like I said, I think you can find a role for him. And certainly there is 0% doubt at all, no way, that he is not a NFL offensive lineman, 53-man roster guy. Like, you roster 9 to 10 offensive linemen, and offensive linemen are really hard to find. Like, he is clearly, very clearly, a 53-man rosterable offensive lineman on probably every single team in the league. But it just depends on how much better you view him and how much of a contract that you want to give him. And it just probably isn't that much. But we'll see what he ultimately gets, and maybe, just maybe, he ends up with Green Bay. All right, top 30 visits. We mentioned Zach Zinter the other day as the first confirmed top 30 visit. Edgerrin Cooper, the linebacker, Texas A&M, is the second top 30 visit that has been reported to Green Bay. I've had some questions here of what are top 30 visits? So every team is granted 30 visits where they can bring college players or draft eligible players into their building and have a top 30 visit. And you only get 30 of them. No more. I guess you could do less, but that you're very limited as to how many that you can have. And there's really 3 ways that you can sort of go about this, or 3 reasons you would do this. I guess 4. One is that you just want to get to know the prospect better. You're very intrigued with them and you want to know every in and out to make sure that you're making the right decision. And you know that they're very high on your board. It doesn't have to necessarily be in round 1, but it's somebody that you're very much considering, and you just want to make sure that you're dotting every I and crossing every T. Number 2 is there's some injury information that you need to check up on or gain better information on. Maybe when you did some of the medical checks or saw some of the other medical records or whatever the case may be, it wasn't complete, or you wanted to do a reevaluation, whatever it might be, but there's some sort of injury check or medical check that you need to, kind of get through. And that could be the second reason that you bring a player in. Number 3 is that you throw teams off the scent. Maybe Green Bay goes in and they know that, they want a corner at pick 25. And everyone thinks though that they're going to take an offensive lineman. So maybe they bring in 5 offensive linemen for top 30 visits to throw everyone off the scent and think that, hey, Green Bay is going to take one of these offensive linemen at pick 25. And the reason that can be valuable is if teams start getting a hint that Green Bay is going to draft an offensive lineman, a couple things can happen. One is that Green Bay might be sitting at 25, and all of a sudden teams might be trading up to 22, 23, 24 to take offensive linemen before Green Bay gets there. And that's a great thing because Green Bay wasn't targeting an offensive lineman. They're actually wanting a corner. The second thing that can happen is if Green Bay's sitting at pick 25 and their corner's there and they really want that corner, really want that corner, really want that corner, if everyone is expecting that they're going to take that corner or that they really want a corner and they've tested all the corners, maybe the team at pick 28 is thinking, all right, we really like a corner too, and we think Green Bay is going to take a corner at 25, so we better trade up to pick 24 so we can go get that corner. These are all games that teams play. And it's extremely important that you sort of shield your hand as best as you can. And sometimes bringing in a bunch of offensive linemen for top, 25 or top 30 visits that could be there at pick 25 could throw the scent off. And maybe that team at 26 doesn't trade up to 24 or 28 to 24. And now your corner's available at 25. You get to take him. And that team that's sitting back 3 picks later is like, son of a, we thought they were going to take an offensive lineman. So these are all games that teams play. And then the other one that Green Bay actually does a really great job of, now this will not be the case with Zach Zinter or Edgerrin Cooper, but Green Bay does a great job of bringing in players that are going to be undrafted free agents. And basically what this is, if you remember, as soon as the draft ends, even before the draft ends, teams are starting to reach out to undrafted free agents to try to get them in the building and sign, because every team is it's a free-for-all to try to sign their priority undrafted free agents. So these are basically your sales pitch to undrafted free agents of, hey, if you don't get drafted, we're showing interest in you. And a lot of other teams don't always bring in the undrafted guys. They're looking at guys that they would draft. Meanwhile, Green Bay is taking sometimes 10 of these to say, and actually pitching some of the undrafted free agents of, hey, we have a ton of interest in you. We are bringing you into our building. You are getting to know our coaches. And this is a place where you can make a team. And if they get to undrafted free agency, they're going to call those guys up and say, hey, remember you met with us. We want to bring you in. And that player might have more of an interest in coming to Green Bay because they had that top 30 visit. So it's like a sales pitch and a recruiting pitch. So they can be used for a variety of different things. But either way, Edgerrin Cooper, Zach Zinter, the 2 confirmed ones so far, at least reported ones so far. And there are 28 more that we will get news on at some point in the near future. Last but not least, before we get to the A.J. Dillon news, Keenan Allen traded to the Chicago Bears. 4th round pick only. This is still an offseason for Chicago that makes 0 sense to me. Keenan Allen, and I'm going to bring it up right here. Sorry that I did not have this prepped ahead of time. Keenan Allen is right now, he's 31 years old. All right. So he was born in 1992, 31 years old. He will turn 32 in April. He will turn 32 years old in April. Chicago has prioritized a lot of more veteran, older players so far in this free agency. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine who is, in fact, a Bears fan, and he did remind me that, hey, the Chicago Bears aren't exactly used to having a stable franchise where their coach and GM are in good standing. They need to go out and win right now. They need to get wins under their belt and show signs of progress, or they're just going to get canned. And it's great that you might get Caleb Williams or a top quarterback, but if you don't show progress and if you don't win games, it might not matter. The great news for the Green Bay Packers is that's a great way for the Bears to operate if you're a Packer fan. That's a bad way for the Bears to operate if you're a Bears fan. The reason being is we talk about all the time is getting your team on the right timeline. Green Bay right now is operating with a team that is all very much on the same timeline other than maybe Preston Smith. They're all young, up-and-coming, hungry players that are developing together, and your hope is in a couple years they're all going to reach their prime and be ready to just kind of tear through the league. That's the hope. But they have a vision, right? The Chicago Bears, they're going to have a rookie quarterback with a veteran tight end with wide receivers on the outside and Keenan Allen, that's an older player. DJ Moore, obviously still very young, but then you've got like Darnell Wright, who's in year two. You've got, it's a group of players that are all over the place, from veteran to youth to it's just a mix. I don't even know how I want to put it. It's like, it's a unimaginative, not smart amalgamation of player. I don't even know what I'm saying at this point. It's not a great way to go about it. This is not the way that you build a successful team long-term, especially when the draft is packed with young, talented wide receivers that you can have develop with a Caleb Williams. They've just handled a lot of things very, very wrong. Now, to be crystal clear, Keenan Allen's a very good player still. He will make things very not fun against Green Bay this year when you've got DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet and DeAndre Swift. They've got some playmakers on that offense. And with Caleb Williams, if he hits, that's going to be a pain. There's no two ways around it. But if you're looking at a team that's going to be harder to play this year, yeah, they're going to be harder to play this year because they now have Keenan Allen, who's really good. But if you're looking at a team that makes sense cohesively long-term for putting together a championship caliber team, they're just all over the place. And you have to sort of be happy from a Packers standpoint, the way that the Bears are putting together this team that just doesn't really make any sense overall. All right, let's talk about A.J. Dillon. I get to nerd out on this. He is back. A.J. Dillon, the mayor of Door County, is back in Green Bay. I am stuck on this one between two Andyisms in some way. Number one, as I always say, what a GM's job is to do is always give yourself options and always give yourself outs. And this contract with A.J. Dillon is going to give them another option this offseason. And that is a very good thing. We'll talk more about that. My other Andyism is the playmaking options, the playmaking positions on offense should be made for, wait for it, playmakers. Your playmaking positions need to have playmakers on it. That's it. And A.J. Dillon, he does some things well, but he is not a playmaker. And I have been critical of some of those pass Packer teams where they just had no run after contact, run after catch ability. And it just was up to the design of the offense and the quarterback really to make big plays. And it never ended up really happening. And you had to just go like 17 plays, 85 yards because you didn't have guys who could run after the catch or make these big explosive plays. And A.J. Dillon was one of those players, just does not make explosive plays on enough occasions that makes it worth it for him to be at one of your playmaker positions. And we can see the evidence of that last year. In 2023, he had 178 carries, 613 yards, only 3.4 yards per carry, only 2 touchdowns. He had 22 catches for 223 yards, 10.1 yards per reception, also no touchdowns. He did not have any fumbles last year, though. That is a plus. As talked about in the past, PFF had 35 players that met criteria. He had a 43.1 elusive rating, which was 27th out of 35. He only had 8 runs of 10 plus yards, only 8 runs of 10 plus yards. That was 33 out of 35 running backs. He only forced 21 missed tackles this past year. That was 35 out of 35 eligible running backs. And his 2.69 yards after contact per attempt was 27th out of 35 running backs. Now, all of that being said, from my grading scale over the past 4 years, he had a plus 2.4 grade, a plus 5.7 grade, a plus 1.85 grade, and this past year he had a plus 1.4 grade. Now, there's been a little bit of a decline there, right? 5.7 2 years ago, 1.85 a year ago, and then 1.4 this past year. So there's been a bit of a decline. And for running back grades in my system, like the 5.7 is a very good grade. The 1.85 and the 1.4 are a little bit more pedestrian, but this is not a player that is being a net negative out on the field. Even though, again, not my cup of tea, not the guy that I would necessarily have brought back, but even through my own grading scale, not grading negative. He's fine. He's graded okay. He's been a net positive. Meanwhile, for PFF, if you'd rather their grades, 78.3 is rookie year, 86.2 in year 2, 81.4 in year 3, 75.7 in year 4. Remember, 60 is average. Those are very good grades by PFF standards. They just are. Now, how we have to look at this, though, is not just his play on the field and how you want to grade him and how you want to evaluate him. It's also based on the contract. Now, this is a very seldomly used 4-year qualifying offer contract. We don't see very many of these. How this works is that A.J. Dillon can get up to $1.45 million above a minimum salary, and the Packers have to pay that, but the additional $1.45 million does not count against the salary cap. So in its simplest terms, if we just want to use an example here, A.J. Dillon would get paid 1 year, $2.575 million, right? He gets $2.575 million legitimately on a 1-year deal. That's his cash. And the Green Bay Packers have to pay that. They pay that in the cash as well. But he only counts $1.125 million against the Packers salary cap, which is the vet minimum for a 4-year player. That is a great, great deal overall. Dillon still gets a higher level of pay, but the Green Bay Packers don't have to count any of that extra money against the salary cap. It's sort of a win-win for both sides. Now, there is a reason, unfortunately, that we cannot quite evaluate this contract quite yet and whether it's a win or a loss for Green Bay. The reason that is the contract could be guaranteed for anywhere from $1.29 million to nothing. And that variance changes up how we view this contract, or at least how I view this contract, in a pretty significant way. If I had to guess, and this is just a guess, is that he's probably guaranteed for about $167,000 in bonuses, which is the most that's allowed, but probably not any of his base salary. That would be my guess. It's probably how I would have done it, but it's really tough to say without actually seeing the contract yet. And we're going to have to wait over the next couple of days to see how much of a guarantee he actually received in this process. The ideal contract is from a Packers standpoint and a salary cap standpoint is little to no guarantees. And that would be a huge win for the Packers when looking at this deal. Now, a quick aside. There are those of you who are extremely happy that A.J. Dillon's back. And if they have to get him back, even if it's guaranteed on a $1.125 million against the salary cap deal, there are people who are thrilled with that and happy to have A.J. Dillon back. And if so, that's great. You're happy no matter what. There are others, and I saw a lot of them online, that were very disappointed in this deal. Feel like A.J. Dillon is not the same back. He's a little bit more plodding. He's not getting that, like we saw with the numbers I just gave, not getting those big playmaking plays, and just not the explosive playmaker that people, myself included, would like to see at that position. But this is where that contract comes into play. Because in an ideal situation where this either has no guarantees or a very small guarantee, this is a great deal for Green Bay. This is just insurance. This is just adding another running back to your running back room that has to compete in training camp. It makes it so that if the draft doesn't necessarily go your way and you don't get a running back early, you still have Josh Jacobs and A.J. Dillon. You can certainly get through a season with that. But if you go out and you get players in the draft and Emmanuel Wilson takes a step up and you get through training camp and Dillon is the 4th or 5th running back coming out of camp, he's gone. You release him. There's no harm or foul. And he's not going to count anything against the cap unless he has guaranteed money. And like I said, it's probably a no guarantee or a small guarantee that you feel comfortable getting out of that contract and paying him a small guarantee on his way out. That's a very common occurrence in the NFL. This is a player in all likelihood who will have to earn his spot in training camp. That's great. You want to see the best version of A.J. Dillon, and competition will do that. And him having to earn his spot will do that. And if he does it, great. It means that he was one of the best running backs in camp, which in that case, you want to keep him. This, to me, will not affect the Packers' thinking on the 53-man roster or the roster calculus or what they do in the draft at all. It won't go, it won't affect how they want to go out and attack the running back position, other than knowing that they have another player there. But they're not going to take that even into consideration. If the best player available is a running back, regardless of what round it's going to be, they'll take it. And they're not going to think twice of, well, we might have to cut A.J. Dillon if it works out. They won't be bothered by that. Again, assuming that there's no big guarantee here. The only thing it affects is that he will take up a spot on the 90-man roster, which, by the way, is 90 people deep. If A.J. Dillon is one of those 90, you are not losing. There are 5 guys right now that you could not even name, at least, and those are like the hardcore people. There are 5 guys I could not name on the roster, and you guys know how religious I am about this. I could not go and name everyone that's on the Packers roster right now. Like, there's just no way. There are a couple of like edge players that they signed up at the end of the year. There's a random tight end they signed at the end of the year. Couldn't name them. And you guys, again, know how deep I am into this. If A.J. Dillon's one of those 90, it should not even register for a moment that that is a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. And again, if there is little to no guarantee, Green Bay can get off the deal at any time and not have to pay anything other than that small guarantee. And that will give yourself options. It's a 1-year vet minimum deal against the cap. There's no downside. Dillon is a very good pass protector. In 2021, he had a pretty epic season. 187 carries, 803 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4.3 yards per carry, 34 catches, 313 yards, another 2 touchdowns, 9.2 yards per reception, over 1,100 total yards, 7 total touchdowns on good efficiency. If you get that A.J. Dillon on what basically amounts to a vet minimum deal, you're stealing at that point. That's a great, great deal. And even if you get a little bit of the lesser version of Dillon still on a vet minimum, guys, Patrick Taylor was on the roster last year on a vet minimum. And I know there's some that still like Patrick Taylor better. I mean, I think it's at least a conversation, but like it's just a no-brainer at this point is to bring him back. And again, if that is a no guarantee or small guarantee, if you get bad A.J. Dillon and you have better alternatives, then they cut him. And I saw people today, and it just cracked me up because they said, Andy, they just brought him back. He's the mayor of Door County. He's a fan favorite. There is no way that they cut A.J. Dillon after this. They just cut Aaron freaking Jones this week. They do not care. They do not care. If they have better options at the end of training camp and A.J. Dillon is not one of them, it will be bye-bye A.J. Dillon. And if he is worthy of the spot and he earns that spot, then great. That is a win for everyone. But they will not care if he is not one of the best 53 players, and they will release him. Now, if it's the less than ideal contract, and let's say they guarantee as much as they can possibly guarantee, which is $1.292 million, and really if it's anything above $1 million, what you're doing in that situation is you're basically guaranteeing him a roster spot on the 53. Because otherwise, you are giving him $1 million for nothing, because if you cut him in training camp, you still pay him $1 million. It's not completely unfathomable, but that is a really bad use of resources that would go against the salary cap, that you guaranteed him $1 million and then just took him off the roster, just kicked him off. That is a bad idea. So if there is like a $1 million or plus actual guarantee in this, it pretty much makes it that he's going to be on the 53. Put him in, and you could pretty much put it in Sharpie at that point. But even if that is the case, even if we have to put in Sharpie, Josh Jacobs and A.J. Dillon as 2 of the running backs, you still can go out and get a running back high, and you can have the running back and Emmanuel Wilson compete against each other. You could keep 4 running backs if you needed to. It's not the end of the world, but you're still going to have options to upgrade that roster, specifically with a draft pick. And it doesn't mean that A.J. Dillon has to be the number 2 back. He can still be number 3. It's far less flexible if they can't release him, but it still does give them some insurance. And you have to remember too, the absolute minimum undrafted rookie free agent signing on the bare minimum contract, the cheapest you can get anyone, is $795,000. A.J. Dillon at most will count $1.292 million against the cap this year. At most. That is $500,000 more than the absolute bare minimum rookie undrafted free agent contract, the cheapest contract that you can absolutely get. So he is $500,000 more than the cheapest possible contract in the entire NFL. This is overall a very low risk signing that has some reward. And again, if he plays like 2021 A.J. Dillon, it's just stealing at this point. Now, overall, my final thoughts on this is it doesn't change the calculus for anything that Green Bay is going to do this offseason. If they want to go out and sign another running back, they can. If they want to go out and draft another running back, they can. If they want a big-time playmaker, number 2 back, and they draft it early, they can still do that. If they get through the draft and they don't necessarily find a guy, then they have options in A.J. Dillon to potentially be that number 2 back, or he'll compete with a late-round rookie and Emmanuel Wilson, and we'll see who the best one is at that point, which is fine. Again, no, very, very little, limited and low risk. Not a super high reward, but a potential reward on a very, very minimum deal. As I said, not the biggest A.J. Dillon guy, but the contract is extremely understandable. He's only 25 years old. He'll turn 26 in May. Matt LaFleur knows how to utilize him. He knows the offense incredibly well. Like I said, his pass blocking is good enough that you could utilize him in that role, and that could still be very valuable to Green Bay. For anyone that's thinking that this is some awful move, I just don't see it. I think they will have options on what they want to do, and it just gives Green Bay a little bit more flexibility with how they want to handle running back the entire rest of this offseason. And like I said, it likely doesn't change anything, and they'll still attack that position in the draft pretty aggressively if I had to guess. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you guys right back here tomorrow. Shout out to our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members: Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Jay Bradad, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Bremen, and David Prendergast. I'll see you guys soon, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.